we're going to have you do some group work. This is our last night of class, so it's your last night of getting to do group work in here. Okay, you can get into groups of anywhere from 5 to 10. Five
We
would
just
work
make
better.
9?
Your assignment is to come up with a list of at least 20 items that you believe are life skills that a person needs to have to be an adult. Items. So the idea is, once a child is ready to leave home and be an adult, what are 20 things that it's essential, at least you believe it's essential, that they know how to do once they leave home? So 20 life skills. Okay, and in case you haven't figured it out, we're talking about teenagers tonight. Sherry found that this morning. I thought, I just have to share that with y'all. Okay, what I want is to see what y'all came up with on your lists. You really should not have had any trouble at all coming up with 20 items. In a little bit, I'm going to tell you what to do with the items you came up with, and quite a few more. So, how many of you came up with items that would fit under the heading survival? Just basic survival?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you have?
Cooking.
Okay? Laundry.
Driving.
Grocery shopping or hunting.
Personal hygiene.
Personal life.
It could. Certainly affects it.
We got earning money. I know it can be financial too, but it's survival.
It's survival.
You know, there are people who don't have driver's license and they're surviving. Like bigger countries, like Germany. But anyway, it's my thoughts.
So driving?
It's already up there. It's already up there.
He's saying in other countries it's not, but it is necessary in Little Rock.
So,
Because you
It's a
can't
story.
get, you can't get in, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't have a public system that's
we don't have a good,
reliable.
yeah, we're not New York.
Get you
or, know.
everywhere.
How to use emergency services?
Yeah.
911, your car broke down side of the road.
Yeah. Okay. Something I didn't call mom or dad?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, what about financial? What do y'all have that might come under the head of financial?
Budgeting.
Budgeting. Paying bills.
Paying bills.
Money
Paying
management.
taxes. Hourly.
We had money management.
Interviewing skills.
Savings.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Gotta have those.
Okay.
Yeah, how to say.
I heard some.
Saving for emergency.
Okay.
Insurance.
Okay, what about occupational?
Work ethic.
Okay.
We put respecting authority, boss. And also to be assertive and marketable, a balance between the two. Being able to effectively communicate.
Critical thinking.
being able to use a planner or a calendar.
Can you tell them that you are ready to launch the launch their business?
Launched a couple, kicking a few more out soon.
We didn't write this one down, but I think taking criticism is good under that one.
We didn't say this under survival, but we all know it's true, dealing with either high school or pumping gas.
Yeah, oh yeah, we said that.
Yeah,
They don't know how to pump gas.
They don't know how to pump gas.
We have that on our list.
We had to relearn in Europe, because it's weird over there.
We also have
Like, you feel
laundry.
ignorant when you're standing there going, you can't get gas.
I don't know what to do. Is it, okay, I didn't see that.
Car maintenance.
Car maintenance, we got
Oh,
that
yeah.
too, yeah.
Changing a tire,
Making your own doctor's appointments.
knowing your medical history, and your social security number.
Y'all are treading on some difficult ground over here.
Oh, under financial too, we had major, how to make a major purchase. Well, any purchase, but you know, buying your first car.
Think about it, think of research.
Just like some people's keep getting.
Yeah, right?
Okay, what about relations?
I had time management. You know.
We have face-to-face communication
That.
under relational, I guess.
That's kind of not been going away with texting and,
You know, social skills,
yeah.
relational for sure.
Being able to manage disappointment or failure. You know, everybody gets a trophy society.
Yeah.
Dating skills.
Yes, you want grandkids someday.
Well, it's surprising to me at how many young people don't really date anymore. They move in groups.
They swipe.
They don't date.
You swipe right or left. One of them.
Well, that's true, they swipe, they Snapchat.
But they don't date.
Said, ask them for help.
Yeah, oh,
Knowing your
yes.
limits and how to.
Using your resources, knowing how to ask for help.
Did we get personal hygiene?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
a
yeah, okay, that's on survival.
It could be relations too.
Yeah, it probably is relational.
We have how to pray. Which might be
Well, like
relational.
finding your own faith.
Yeah, finding your own faith. What would that be?
You know, not piggybacking off your parents anymore.
What to do when you have an accident or you
Or get
pulled
pulled
over.
over, yeah.
Crying.
We did let her know.
That'd be survival.
That's probably also under respect and authority. Okay.
Sewing on a button.
Life skills.
Got car and clean.
Home and lawn maintenance. Cleaning,
Yeah.
It's okay, we got cleaning. That's
Using a debit card.
Yes.
I mean, I've had to teach my kids how to use a debit card at a gas pump or in a, you know.
Go through the drive-through.
and not to use it.
Anyway, not, well,
You need money to use this.
yes, there must be money in that account. And when that credit card thing comes in the mail, do this.
Yeah, yes. That needs to be
Do your
in there. How to create a resume, I don't know if that would probably go under interview or.
occupational interview, resume. Do they not teach that in senior level classes anymore?
No.
Well, I think it depends on the
They didn't when
teacher.
you were in school?
They don't think they do now. I don't know that Jeff and Emma has.
Well, you know, the difference may be they don't expect a high schooler to go out and get a job. They expect a high schooler to go to college. Maybe in college, somebody will teach them how.
Yeah, well, my sister.
But
They
we
won't,
had-
because they'll expect them to learn it in high
Right.
school.
Hey,
Right.
I'll tell you this right now,
a high school kid getting out of high school can go to the Welding Institute just right up in here. They get out, start out at $30 an hour, $80 a day per diem. Bam, right out of there.
Not just,
Already got
it's
three of
welding,
them.
it's plumber, it's electrician, it's all those technical trades. That's why I tell my kids, I'm like, you go to college, you find a trade, or you join the military. There's your three choices. Pick one. But we're not your retirement plan.
Right.
Then we have, respect authority, what about respecting others too under that relational?
Yeah.
Okay, see now you're seeing how many of these you can start breaking them down into subcomponents. We're gonna come back to that in a moment. Yeah, that's smart.
Let's check these off as we teach you.
That is the lesson for tonight. This is called Adult at 18. It's a program of child rearing that was developed, wow, a long time ago. 30 years ago, something like that, in Oklahoma for their foster system, because at that time, foster kids at 18 aged out. And on the day they turned 18, commonly they were shown the door from their foster family, because that family no longer had any legal right to them, nor did they get any money or help for taking care of them. So now you have a child, 18, usually in the foster system, they're at least a year behind in school. So they're probably like a sophomore, junior in high school. And they're out on the street. How do you survive? Yeah, not doing legal stuff. So with a challenge from the government, a group of people working at the University of Oklahoma sat down, studied this out with a combination of family specialists and sociologists and social workers and law enforcement people and educators, and they came up with this plan with the idea that any child in the foster system on the day they turned 12 or on the day they entered the foster system would be sat down, well, the day they entered if they were over 12, and given a list of at least 200 life skills. I've seen lists up to 400, but 200 is a good amount. And it wouldn't take much to break these down into 200. Once you start looking at cleaning. Clean what? Clean dishes? Clean clothes? Clean the toilet? Yeah, clean under your bed? Get rid of the pizza cartons in your bedroom? I mean, there's just a long list of things that would come under cleaning. Probably 20, 30 items just under cleaning. Same thing with car maintenance. Same thing with find a job. And we've got interviewing. We've got creating resume. How do you know where the job's at? So you got networking. You've got looking at where jobs are posted. You've got how to call and how to get the interview. How to follow up after the interview. I mean, all of that comes under just getting a job. You've got work ethic at some point, which you can break down into show up. Show up on time. You can keep a job for a long time with a high level of incompetence if you show up on time. Because that puts you ahead of the other employees. But kids don't know that. They don't automatically do that. And so they would be set down at the age of 12 and have this heart-to-heart with their foster parent or their caseworker, who would be saying, on your 18th birthday, you're out of the system. And at that point, you have to be able to survive on your own. Now, it's no longer that way over there. Their system, Arkansas system, most state system, works with these kids past their 18th birthday to try to get them to some form of stability. But this is a fairly recent thing. But at that time, they were told, you have to be prepared to be completely self-sufficient on your 18th birthday. Here is a long list of things that you need to master to be self-sufficient as an adult. And then they'd go through there with them and say, which of these can you already do well? The idea behind this is you do it with your kids on their 12th birthday. At the time I was exposed to this, my oldest child, just like a month earlier, turned 13. And had an 11-year-old and had a 9-year-old. And I said, this sounds good. I like the idea of them being competent at 18, able to live on their own. So that way if they stay home, they can pay rent. And they don't have to stay home. And I don't have to feel guilty about kicking them out. So we set our 13-year-old down with a long list of these things and went over them and said, what can you already do? And well, she could already do a number of things. She could wash her own laundry. She could sort clothes. She could set them on the right temperatures in the washing machine, decide what to put in the dryer and on what temperature and what had to be laid out or hung up. She could figure that stuff out. She could cook. She could feed herself. She could go to the grocery store and select appropriate food for what she's going to cook. Okay, those were some really important skills she already had. There's a lot of other things she did not have. And so part of your goal with the 200 plus list is to scare them to death. So they look over this and they say, that's what an adult is like? Yeah, it is, really. You got to learn this. And we have 6 years. Is that right? 7 years? From 12 to 18? I don't do math. 6. 6 and 12, yeah. Okay, 6 years. I mean, if I did math, I'd be an engineer. I'm not an engineer. I'm a therapist. Don't do math. You have 6 years to learn these things. You don't have to learn them all this year. But you have to learn 1/6 of those this year. And some of these things you can't learn, like driving a car. You cannot learn that until you're at least 15. So we're not going to work on that right now. Some of these things you need to learn now. And you already know whatever 1/6 of 200 or 220 or 250 or however long your list is. You figured out how much 1/6 of that is. Say, this is the number of items we have to work on this year. Which ones do you think we should work on? You let them pick about half of them, and you pick about half of them. And say, okay, this is this year's tasks. You have to learn these things by the time you have your next birthday, if we're going to stay on schedule for you to be adult at 18. Okay, that's fairly easy with a 12-year-old. And then on their 13th birthday, you got to remember to sit down and do it again. Pull out that list so you can't lose the list. And you go down and you've marked all the ones they're going to work on. You remind them of that. It may be the first time either of you have thought about it in a year. But you need to see, have they learned any of this? Check them off. Have they learned any of the other items on the list? If so, check them off. Okay, see how many's left. Divide that by 5, because now you only got 5 years to go. Say, okay, how many of these now are you going to learn this year? 1/5 of it. Let them pick half, you pick half. Hopefully they're more serious in their 13th year, because, wow, that year went by a lot faster than I thought it would. I only have 5 years till I'm 18. It's slightly more real to them. And you work with them on that. Then, you do the same thing on their 14th birthday. This is where this really starts to get good. Because by the time they're 14, that's when they're really coming in with, you don't let me do anything. You don't want me to have any fun. All my friends get to do this, and I don't get to do any of this stuff. And you're like, hey, how many of your friends are going to be adults at 18? How many of your friends' parents believe in them? How many of your friends, their parents, are taking the time to teach them adult survival skills? Who in your life really wants you to have a good life? Your friends? They teaching you any of this stuff? Or me? I think I'm the one here that has the greatest vested interest in you having a wonderful life. And if you don't have a wonderful life, I won't have a wonderful life. So, you have to have a wonderful life. You have to have fun. You have to be good. You have to. So you're not going out with those kids and getting killed. You're staying home, staying alive, and learning stuff. Love that talk. About 14, you get to have that. I can almost guarantee it. Well, and then they'll, about every 6 months, forget that and come up with it again, and you're like, we already covered this. I'm on your side. I'm the one teaching you this stuff. How are you doing on your list? And every time they get really obnoxious, you bring the list out. And say, how are you doing on this stuff? Okay, we only have 6 months to your next birthday, and you've only done 5 of these things. We got 18 more to go. Which ones do you want to work on tonight? And so you start them on that. You keep directing them back to the fact that it's their life, and you're helping them to learn what they need to go live their life. It really neutralizes a lot of this 16-year-old opposition like this guy was talking about. Most 16-year-olds are extremely obnoxious. But 16-year-olds of parents who are trying to train them to be an adult, where you're both kind of panicking because there's only 2 years left. And look at the long list of things, because frankly, kids will learn more of these the closer they get to 18. So everybody's going to be behind. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Everybody's going to be behind on the list by the time they hit 16. But you want this kid to be panicking, saying, I got 120 things to learn. You know, in 4 years, I have learned 80. I'm going to be stuck at home till I'm 20. And you're like, yes, I'm worried about that. We want you to be able to go do stuff. Hike the outback. Climb Kilimanjaro. Go to college. I mean, do something like that. We don't want you hiding at home, playing video games for the rest of your life. We want you to have a life. So then you pick half of the 120 and say, we're going to work on that this year. Kids really start getting serious. And that's when you break it down to, okay, we got 60 items. We have 12 months. Okay, that's like, what, 5 a month? So that's more than 1 a week that you have to master. We're going to have to get busy. Let's start with this job stuff. You're 16. You can go get a real job. Go get a real job. Do you know how to do that? Well, let's talk about that. So you get them a job. And I encourage you, please don't be one of these parents. And you may be, there's a number in this congregation, there's a number everywhere I'm at, where they're like, their job in high school is to go to school and come home and do homework. Well, we talked last week about homework. Let's get rid of homework. Gives them a lot more time. It is much more important for them to develop a work ethic than for them to be able to properly do an algebra problem. One is going to make a life for them. The other one, they're going to forget at some point, hopefully after they've taken all of their standardized tests. But they'll forget it at some point. I mean, how many of y'all remember all of that algebra stuff you had to learn? I got a book that's got it in it. If I ever need it, I'll pull the book out and I'll look it up. Now, I've got one of these fancy phones that's got almost all of those things programmed into the phone. I bet yours does too. I learned that accidentally. Your calculator program, if you turn your phone sideways, it becomes this super powerful calculator with all this stuff programmed in. So your kids don't need to learn all that stuff. They do need to learn how to put gas in a car if they're going to drive a car. Or how to change a tire if they're going to drive a car out on the highway. Or how to call roadside service if they're going to drive out on the highway. They need to have some way of surviving. Now, there are some benefits to working through this. See, one of the things that should be on here is they're able to put themselves to bed at a decent hour. They're able to get themselves up at the appropriate time.
We said that, we didn't have, oh yeah, I forgot.
We put that on there.
Yeah, that I highly recommend you start with them on at 12. That should be one of the very first things you start teaching them. It makes your life so much better and gives them a lot more power. But similar to that are things like curfew. You should be setting the curfew at 12 and 13, probably 14. But by 14, you might want to negotiate like certain special occasions with them, or maybe they get exceptions to the curfew. By 15, you might want to renegotiate curfew. Or really at 12, 13, 14, you can start by negotiating bedtime. If they're going to put themselves to bed, then they get to tell you, well, when are they going to put themselves to bed? And you can remind them or hold them responsible, but they've got to be in bed by the time they've said they're going to be in bed. By the time they're 16, you do the same thing with curfews. What's an appropriate curfew? Let's negotiate that. Now, the appropriate curfew for me was, with my kids, was always 9 o'clock. Because I wanted them home by 9 o'clock so I could quit worrying about it.
Yeah.
That was selfish. That was for me. For a 16-year-old, 9 o'clock is a very early curfew. Maybe 10 o'clock on weeknights and 11 o'clock on the weekends, which is what I think I ended up negotiating with each of my kids, but I let each one of them individually negotiate it. And they had to make a good case for it, or they didn't sell me on it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. So, you have a 19-year-old who still lives at home. Is setting a curfew for her just because she's 19 but mainly because she still lives at home, is that asking too much, or is that just not appropriate just because she's 19?
It's a more complicated question. Curfew is part of the whole life skill set. If they don't know how to put themselves to bed at an appropriate time, they won't do a good job with the curfew. So they have to already have mastered the art of selecting a reasonable time to put themselves to bed and putting themselves to bed consistently. And then they will get themselves home at an appropriate time. Yes, sir.
I think it's beautiful. And the reason why I say that, to help you out with your question, because when parents do give a teenager or a 19 or a younger person curfews, because when they do get older, it teach them discipline. It teach them how to kick it in the right way. And when they need to do whatever it ain't just about kicking them when they get on their feet. Anyways, their mind gonna go in the right direction.
Yeah.
Change how I feel about it.
So I would say instead of giving a 19-year-old a curfew, it would be better to ask the 19-year-old to tell you what their curfew is, with just the expectation she's going to have one. And if she's like, oh, I don't have one, you're like, I can't live like that. That's what I told my kids when they came home from college. You know, they've been off away from home without me having to make sure they're in bed every night for a whole school year, and now they come back home for the summer, and they're going to live in my home, and they're going to come in at all hours, and I will be awake until they come in. Because it's one thing when they're in another city and I don't have any control, I can go to sleep at night. I don't have to call them up and make sure they're, now some mamas have to do that, possibly some dads. That's not healthy for you. You need to get over that. But when they come back home, it is very difficult, or at least it was for me, to just treat them like an adult, even though I wanted to treat them like an adult. Because if they're coming in at 2 in the morning, I'm still awake at 2 in the morning wondering if the cops are going to come knock on the door. So what I did with each one of my kids when that happened was I said, I need you to set a curfew and tell me when your curfew is so that I can go to sleep. Because when you're out all hours, and you have the right to be out all hours, but when you are, I'm awake all hours. And unless you're going to get up at the same time I do and go work as hard as I do, I think you should be in early enough for me to go to sleep. And all 3 of my kids were respectful enough to do that. And they set curfews, and there'd be times when they'd say, okay, I won't be home tonight, I'll be at a friend's. Okay. I've been trusting them off at college to make good decisions, and that's the thing about this. You teach them to make good decisions. You teach them to take responsibility. You teach them discipline. And people, I have 3 very different kids that approach this in very different ways, and it worked with all 3 of them. So I highly recommend this. I ran it as an experiment, not knowing if it would work. It's one of the best things I did as a parent for my kids. It took all kinds of problems out of parenting teenagers. It enabled me to be on their side. It enabled me to keep pointing out to them throughout the teen years how they were different and being raised different than their friends. And it enabled me, when each one of them went off to college, to not worry about that. Matter of fact, I was upset with the colleges, especially the way they treated my girls, and giving them 11 o'clock curfews or 11:30 curfews. I'm like, my girls know how to get home at a decent time and put themselves to bed at a decent time. And just because the rest of these kids don't know how to, why are you picking on my kids? But my kids didn't mind it. I was the one that's upset about it. Yeah. And then I was upset because they didn't really have an enforced curfew for my son. I'm like, why are they doing that to the girls and not to my boy? The boys were always out knocking on the windows of the girls' dorm, trying to talk to them at 1 in the morning. Okay, that's school. I didn't know about any of that until summer. Okay, we're out of time, we're out of classes. If you run into specific problems, contact me.